Victoria Harrington walked through the shiny marble lobby of Meridian Corporation like she owned the world. Her high heels clicked loudly on the polished floor, making a sound that seemed to announce her importance to everyone around. At 35 years old, she had just become the youngest CEO in the company's history, and she made sure everyone knew it. The lobby was huge and impressive, with tall windows that let in streams of golden sunlight. But the real showpiece was the magnificent grand piano that sat right in the center. It was a beautiful black Steinway from the 1920s, so shiny you could see your reflection in it. The piano had been there for decades, but nobody ever played it. It was just for show, like an expensive piece of art. Victoria loved that piano not because she could play it, but because it made the company look sophisticated and wealthy. Just like her, she thought. She had worked hard to get where she was, climbing the corporate ladder step by step. But somewhere along the way, she had forgotten how to treat people with kindness. Every morning, Victoria would stride past the piano, adjusting her designer jacket and checking her reflection in its glossy surface. She had graduated from Harvard Business School with top grades, and she never let anyone forget it. Her office was on the top floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the entire city. From up there, everything looked small, and that's exactly how she liked to see the world. The employees at Meridian Corporation had mixed feelings about their new boss. Some admired her business skills and the way she could close deals that others couldn't. But many were afraid of her sharp tongue and cold attitude. She had a way of making people feel small with just a look or a few cutting words. Victoria didn't care much about being liked. She cared about being respected, or more accurately, being feared. She believed that fear was a better motivator than friendship. In her mind, she was surrounded by people who were beneath her level of intelligence and education. She saw herself as a thoroughbred running among ordinary horses. The company itself was doing well under her leadership. Profits were up and the shareholders were happy. But the workplace atmosphere had become tense and uncomfortable. People walked on eggshells around Victoria, always worried they might say or do something wrong that would bring her anger down on them. Victoria had grown up in a wealthy family, so luxury and privilege felt normal to her. She lived in a penthouse apartment, drove an expensive car, and wore clothes that cost more than most people made in a month. But all this wealth had created a bubble around her, separating her from the reality of how most people lived and worked. She had a habit of looking down on anyone she considered beneath her social status. The cleaning staff, security guards, and maintenance workers were practically invisible to her. She would walk past them as if they didn't exist, never bothering to learn their names or acknowledge their hard work. The grand piano in the lobby had become a symbol of everything Victoria valued about herself and her company. It was beautiful, expensive, untouchable, and impressive, just like she wanted to be seen. She often told visitors about the piano's history and value, using it as a conversation starter during important business meetings. Little did Victoria know that this piano, which she saw as nothing more than a status symbol, would soon become the center of a story that would change her life forever. The beautiful instrument that sat silent and untouched day after day was about to find its voice in the most unexpected way. As Victoria continued her daily routine of power meetings, expensive lunches, and looking down on others, she had no idea that her carefully constructed world was about to be shaken to its core. The piano that she used to show off her company's sophistication would soon teach her a lesson about true talent, dignity, and respect. The marble lobby continued to echo with the sound of her confident footsteps, but those footsteps were walking her toward an encounter that would humble her in ways she never thought possible. Victoria Harrington, the snobbish CEO who thought she was better than everyone else, was about to meet someone who would show her what real class and talent looked like. It was almost 9 o'clock on a Tuesday evening when Victoria realized she had left some important documents in her office. The building was mostly empty, with only the night shift workers quietly doing their jobs. Victoria sighed with annoyance as she drove back to the office, her mind already focused on the early morning meeting where she would need those papers. The lobby was dimly lit, with only the security desk lamp and a few overhead lights creating pools of warm light in the vast space. Victoria's heels echoed even louder in the empty building as she walked quickly toward the elevators. She was in a hurry and just wanted to grab her documents and get home to her expensive wine and comfortable couch. But as she passed the grand piano, something made her stop. She heard a soft, gentle sound coming from the direction of the beautiful instrument. At first she thought it might be the building settling or maybe the air conditioning system. But as she listened more carefully, she realized someone was touching the piano keys. Victoria felt her blood pressure rise immediately. Nobody was supposed to touch that piano. Ever. It was worth more than most people made in a year, and it was supposed to remain pristine and untouched. She stormed toward the sound, her anger building with each step. What she saw made her even more furious. A woman in a simple gray cleaning uniform was standing next to the piano, her weathered hands gently touching the keys. The woman was older, probably in her late 50s, with graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. Her cleaning cart was parked nearby, filled with the tools of her trade, mops, sprays, and trash bags. This was Elena Rodriguez, though Victoria had never bothered to learn her name. Elena had been working at Meridian Corporation for 15 years, cleaning offices and maintaining the building during the night shift. She was the kind of employee that Victoria never noticed, invisible, quiet, and hard-working. Elena was so absorbed in the moment that she didn't hear Victoria approaching. Her fingers were barely touching the keys, not really playing but just feeling the smooth ivory surface. There was something almost reverent in the way she touched the instrument, like she was greeting an old friend. "What do you think you're doing?" Victoria's voice cut through the quiet lobby like a knife. Elena jumped back from the piano, startled and clearly embarrassed to be caught. "I'm sorry, miss," Elena said softly, her accent revealing her Latin American background. I was just cleaning around the piano and You were touching it with your dirty hands," Victoria interrupted, her voice getting louder and more angry. "Do you have any idea how much this piano costs? Do you think it's some toy for the cleaning staff to mess around with?" Elena stepped back further, her hands now clasped in front of her. She looked down at the floor, her cheeks burning with shame. "I didn't mean any harm. I was very careful." "Careful?" Victoria laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. It was cruel and mocking. "You think being careful matters? You're a janitor. You clean toilets and empty trash cans. What makes you think you have any right to touch something this valuable?" By now the security guard on duty had heard the commotion and came over to see what was happening. He was an older man who had always been respectful to everyone in the building, including the cleaning staff. He could see that Elena was upset, but he also knew better than to get involved when Victoria was angry. "This is exactly what's wrong with people today," Victoria continued, her voice echoing in the empty lobby. "No respect for boundaries. No understanding of their place. You see something beautiful and expensive and you think you can just touch it because you want to." Elena finally looked up, and Victoria could see tears forming in her eyes. But there was also something else there, a dignity that Victoria didn't expect to see in a janitor. Elena straightened her shoulders and spoke quietly but clearly. "I understand. It won't happen again." "You're absolutely right, it won't happen again," Victoria snapped. "Because if I ever catch you near this piano again, you'll be looking for a new job. Do you understand me?" Elena nodded silently and turned back to her cleaning cart. As she wheeled it away, Victoria called after her with another cruel laugh. "Some people need to learn their place in this world. Not everyone gets to touch the fine things in life." The security guard watched Elena disappear around the corner, then looked back at Victoria with an expression she couldn't quite read. Victoria didn't care what he thought. She had protected the company's valuable property and put an employee in her place. In her mind, she had done exactly what a good CEO should do. As Victoria rode the elevator up to her office, she felt satisfied with how she had handled the situation. She had no idea that the woman she had just humiliated was about to change her life in ways she couldn't imagine. The piano that Victoria was so proud to protect would soon become the instrument of her own downfall. Elena, meanwhile, continued her work in the upper floors, but her hands were shaking slightly as she cleaned. The encounter had brought back memories and feelings that she had buried deep inside for many years. Victoria's cruel words had hurt, but they had also awakened something in Elena that had been sleeping for far too long. The next morning arrived with Victoria in an especially good mood. She had slept well, enjoyed her expensive coffee, and was looking forward to announcing something she had been planning for weeks. As she walked through the lobby, she glanced at the grand piano with satisfaction, remembering how she had protected it from inappropriate touching the night before. Victoria had called an all-staff meeting for 10 o'clock, which was unusual. Normally, she only spoke to department heads and senior managers. But today was different. She had something important to share that would affect the entire company. The conference room was packed with employees from every level. Executives in their suits, administrative staff, maintenance workers, and even some of the cleaning crew who had stayed past their shift to attend. Elena was there too, sitting quietly in the back corner, still feeling the sting of humiliation from the previous evening. Victoria stood at the front of the room, looking confident and pleased with herself. She was wearing one of her most expensive outfits and her hair was perfectly styled. Everything about her appearance screamed success and superiority. "I've gathered everyone here today to announce something very exciting," Victoria began, her voice carrying easily through the room. "As you all know, Meridian Corporation has always been committed to giving back to the community. This year we're hosting our annual charity gala, and it's going to be bigger and better than ever before." The room buzzed with quiet conversation. The charity gala was always a major event, but most of the regular employees never got to attend. It was usually reserved for wealthy donors, important clients, and high-level executives. "This year's gala will raise money for children's education programs," Victoria continued. "We're expecting over 500 guests, including some of the most important people in the city. The mayor will be there, along with several city council members and some very wealthy philanthropists." Victoria paused for effect, clearly enjoying being the center of attention. "And to make this event truly special, I've hired Roberto Chen, one of the most famous classical pianists in the country. He'll be performing on our beautiful lobby piano, which will be moved to the ballroom for the occasion." Some people in the room seemed impressed, while others just nodded politely. Victoria was just getting started. "Mr. Chen charges $50,000 for a single performance," she said, unable to hide her pride in spending such a large amount. "But when you want quality, when you want sophistication, you have to be willing to pay for it. Some people think that just anyone can sit down at a piano and make beautiful music, but real talent is rare and expensive." As Victoria spoke these words, her eyes moved around the room and landed briefly on Elena. There was a slight smirk on her face, as if she was remembering their encounter from the night before. Elena felt her cheeks burn, but she kept her expression calm and dignified. "The gala will showcase everything that makes Meridian Corporation special," Victoria went on. "Elegance, sophistication, and an appreciation for the finer things in life. It's important that everyone understands what this company represents." After the meeting ended, most employees filed out of the conference room, returning to their work. But Elena remained in her seat, thinking about Victoria's words. Something was stirring inside her, a feeling she hadn't experienced in many years. As Victoria gathered her papers and prepared to leave, Elena stood up and walked toward the front of the room. Victoria looked up in surprise, clearly not expecting the janitor to approach her. "Excuse me, Miss Harrington," Elena said quietly, her voice steady despite her nervousness. Victoria raised an eyebrow, annoyed at being approached by someone she considered so far beneath her. "What is it? Don't you have cleaning to do?" Elena took a deep breath before speaking. "I heard about your charity gala and the piano performance. I was wondering, would you consider letting me perform instead of the expensive pianist?" The silence in the room was deafening. Victoria stared at Elena as if she had just suggested something completely insane. Then slowly a smile spread across Victoria's face, but it wasn't a kind smile. "You?" Victoria said, her voice rising with disbelief. "You want to perform at my charity gala? The janitor who I caught touching the piano last night wants to replace a $50,000 professional musician?" Elena nodded, her dignity intact despite Victoria's mocking tone. "Yes, I believe I could do a good job." Victoria began to laugh, and it was the same cruel laugh from the night before. "This is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Do you have any idea who will be at this event? These are sophisticated people who appreciate real talent, not whatever it is you think you can do." "I understand it seems unlikely," Elena replied calmly, "but I'm asking for just one chance to prove myself." Victoria's laughter got louder and more mocking. She looked around the room as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "One chance? You want me to risk the most important event of the year on a janitor who thinks she can play piano?" Elena stood her ground, her voice never wavering. "Yes, that's exactly what I'm asking for." Victoria was quiet for a moment, and Elena could see the wheels turning in her mind. Then Victoria's smile returned, but this time it was different. It was the smile of someone who had just thought of a very entertaining game. "You know what? I'll make you a deal," Victoria said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. I'll give you your chance to perform at the gala, but when you embarrass yourself in front of 500 important people, when you prove that you have no business touching that piano, you're fired. No severance pay, no references, nothing." Elena considered this for a moment, understanding exactly what Victoria was offering, a chance to humiliate herself publicly in exchange for losing her job. "And if I don't embarrass myself?" Elena asked quietly. Victoria laughed again. "If by some miracle you don't completely humiliate yourself in this company, I'll give you anything you want. Anything at all." Elena extended her hand toward Victoria. "Then we have a deal." Victoria shook Elena's hand, still smiling with cruel amusement. She had no doubt that she was about to get rid of a presumptuous employee while providing entertainment for herself. She had no idea that she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Elena Rodriguez had not always been a janitor. 40 years ago, in the beautiful city of Buenos Aires, Argentina, she was known by a different name and lived a completely different life. Back then, she was Elena Mendoza, a child prodigy whose fingers could make magic happen on piano keys. As a little girl growing up in a modest but loving home, Elena discovered the piano when she was just 4 years old. Her parents, though not wealthy, managed to buy an old upright piano from a neighbor who was moving away. The moment Elena's tiny fingers touched those keys, something extraordinary happened. Music flowed from her naturally, as if she had been born knowing how to play. By the time she was 8, Elena was performing in local concerts and competitions. Her talent was so remarkable that people would travel from other cities just to hear the little girl, who could make grown adults cry with her beautiful music. Her parents worked extra jobs to pay for piano lessons with the best teachers they could find. When Elena turned 12, something incredible happened. She was accepted into the prestigious Buenos Aires National Conservatory, one of the most respected music schools in South America. Only the most gifted young musicians were chosen to study there, and Elena was the youngest student they had ever accepted. At the conservatory, Elena flourished. She studied under Master Giuseppe Valentini, an Italian pianist who had performed in concert halls around the world. He recognized immediately that Elena had something special, not just technical skill, but the ability to pour her soul into the music and touch people's hearts. By the time she was 16, Elena was performing with symphony orchestras and winning international competitions. Music critics wrote glowing reviews about the teenage girl who could bring audiences to their feet with her passionate performances. She was often compared to the great classical pianists of history. Elena's specialty was the romantic composers, Chopin, Rachmaninoff, Liszt. Their complex, emotional pieces seemed to speak through her fingers. When she played Chopin's ballads, people said you could feel your heart breaking and healing at the same time. Her interpretation of Rachmaninoff's concertos was so powerful that other pianists would come just to watch her perform. After graduating from the conservatory with highest honors, Elena began touring internationally. She performed in concert halls in Paris, London, New York, and Vienna. Her recordings were selling well, and music magazines featured her on their covers. At 22, she seemed destined to become one of the world's great classical pianists. But life has a way of changing everything in an instant. Elena met and fell in love with Diego Rodriguez, a young businessman who managed cultural events. He was handsome, kind, and completely supportive of her musical career. They married in a beautiful ceremony in Buenos Aires, with Elena's piano teacher playing wedding music on the same piano where she had first learned to play. For 3 wonderful years, Elena continued her career while building a happy marriage with Diego. They traveled together for her concerts, and Diego handled the business side of her performances. They were planning to start a family and were talking about Elena possibly teaching at the conservatory while continuing to perform. Then everything changed in one terrible night. Elena's parents and younger brother were killed in a car accident while driving to one of her concerts. The grief was overwhelming, but even worse news was coming. Diego had been secretly borrowing money to fund Elena's career, using their home and savings as collateral. When his business partners turned out to be involved with dangerous people, Diego and Elena found themselves in serious trouble. One morning, Elena woke up to find Diego gone. He had left a note explaining that he was in danger, and that staying would put Elena at risk too. He begged her to leave Argentina immediately and start a new life somewhere safe. He promised he would find her when it was safe to do so. Elena had to make an impossible choice. She could stay in Argentina and risk her safety, or leave everything behind, her career, her friends, her entire identity, and start over in a foreign country. With her heart broken and her world destroyed, Elena sold everything she owned and bought a plane ticket to the United States. She arrived in New York with just 2 suitcases and a few $100s. She spoke very little English and had no contacts in America. Her conservatory credentials weren't recognized in the U.S., and without proper documentation and connections, she couldn't get work as a professional pianist. For months, Elena survived by taking whatever jobs she could find, washing dishes in restaurants, cleaning houses, working in factories. Her hands, which had once been insured for thousands of dollars, now scrubbed floors and washed dishes. The same fingers that had brought audiences to their feet now ached from manual labor. Eventually, Elena found work as a night janitor at various office buildings. The work was steady, and the night shift meant she could avoid too much interaction with people. She was still learning English and felt embarrassed about her accent and limited vocabulary. She never heard from Diego again. Through friends back in Argentina, she learned that he had been killed just months after she left the country. The man she loved, who had sacrificed everything to keep her safe, was gone forever. For 15 years, Elena worked quietly at Meridian Corporation, invisible to the executives and managers who passed her in the hallways. She had built a simple life, a small apartment, a few friends among the other cleaning staff, and the peaceful routine of her night shift work. But she never forgot the music. Late at night, when the building was empty, she would sometimes find herself drawn to the beautiful grand piano in the lobby. She would never actually play it. That would be inappropriate. But sometimes, she would gently touch the keys and remember what it felt like when music flowed through her fingers. Elena had buried her musical past so deeply that even she sometimes forgot who she used to be. But Victoria's cruel challenge had awakened something that had been sleeping for too long. The little girl from Buenos Aires who had made magic with piano keys was still there, waiting for one more chance to shine. That night, after her shift ended and the building was completely empty, Elena stood in front of the grand piano for a long time without touching it. Her hands were trembling slightly, not from fear, but from excitement she hadn't felt in 15 years. She had made a promise to Victoria, and now she had to decide if she was brave enough to keep it. Slowly, Elena sat down on the piano bench and placed her fingers on the keys. The moment she touched them, something magical happened. It was like greeting an old friend after years of separation. Her fingers remembered exactly where they belonged. Even though it had been so long since she had played a real piano, she started with something simple, scales and basic exercises that she had learned as a child. Her fingers were stiff at first, and she could feel how much strength and flexibility she had lost over the years of cleaning and manual labor. But gradually, as she continued to practice, her hands began to remember their old skills. The security guard, Robert, was making his rounds when he heard the soft sound of piano music coming from the lobby. He was surprised because he knew the piano was never supposed to be played. But when he saw it was Elena, he decided to watch from a distance rather than interrupt her. Robert had always liked Elena. She was one of the few people in the building who treated him with respect and kindness. She always said hello when she saw him and sometimes brought him coffee during the long night shifts. He could see that whatever she was doing at the piano was important to her. As Elena played, Robert was amazed by what he heard. This wasn't someone just messing around with a piano. This was real music, beautiful and skilled. He had no idea that the quiet janitor could play like this. After listening for a while, he approached her. "Elena," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. "That's beautiful music. I had no idea you could play piano." Elena stopped playing and looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry, Robert. I know I shouldn't be using the piano. It's just, I made a promise and I need to practice." Robert sat down in one of the lobby chairs. "What kind of promise?" Elena told him about her encounter with Victoria and the challenge she had accepted. Robert listened with growing amazement and concern. He knew how cruel Victoria could be, and he was worried that Elena was setting herself up for public humiliation. "Elena," he said gently, "are you sure about this? Victoria isn't a kind person. She's setting you up to fail so she can fire you and embarrass you at the same time." Elena nodded. "I know what she's trying to do. But Robert, I used to be a professional pianist. A long time ago in another life I performed in concert halls around the world. I need to see if I can still do it. Robert was quiet for a moment, processing this surprising information. Well then, he said finally, I guess you need to practice, and I'll make sure nobody bothers you while you do it. From that night on, Elena began practicing every night after her cleaning shift was finished. Robert became her protector, making sure she had uninterrupted time with the piano. He would even adjust his security rounds to give her longer periods of practice time. Word began to spread quietly among the night shift workers. Carmen, who cleaned the executive offices, noticed that Elena was staying later than usual. When she found out what Elena was doing, she was amazed and excited. She had always felt invisible and unimportant at work, and the idea that one of them might show up the Snobbish CEO was thrilling. Miguel, the maintenance supervisor, overheard Carmen and Robert talking about Elena's secret practice sessions. He was skeptical at first. How could a janitor possibly be good enough to perform at a fancy charity gala? But one night he stayed late to listen for himself. What he heard changed his mind completely. Elena was playing a piece by Chopin that was incredibly difficult and emotional. Miguel had heard classical music before, but never anything like this. Elena's playing was so beautiful and passionate that it gave him goosebumps. He realized that Elena wasn't just good, she was extraordinary. The news spread through the network of custodial staff, security guards, and maintenance workers. People who had felt overlooked and dismissed by management for years suddenly had a champion. Elena represented all of them, the invisible workers who kept the company running but were never appreciated. As Elena continued to practice night after night, her skills came back more and more. Her fingers regained their strength and speed. The musical knowledge that had been buried for 15 years began to surface again. She remembered pieces she thought she had forgotten, and her interpretation became deeper and more emotional than it had ever been. But it wasn't easy. Elena's hands would cramp and ache after hours of practice. Her back hurt from sitting at the piano bench after already working a full shift cleaning offices. Some nights she would get so frustrated with mistakes that she would have to stop and take breaks to calm down. The hardest part wasn't physical, it was emotional. Playing music again brought back all the memories of her previous life. She remembered her parents, her brother, her husband Diego, and all the dreams that had been lost. Sometimes she would start crying while she played, her tears falling onto the piano keys. But Elena kept practicing. She chose 2 pieces for the gala, Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor, which had always been one of her favorites, and a section from Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, which was incredibly challenging but had been her signature piece during her performing years. As the day of the gala approached, Elena's secret support network grew. Rosa from the cafeteria started bringing her extra food to keep her energy up during the long practice sessions. James from building maintenance made sure the piano was perfectly tuned. Even some of the younger cleaning staff would stay after their shifts just to listen to Elena practice. Victoria had no idea what was happening in her building during the night hours. She was busy preparing for the gala, choosing her outfit and looking forward to the moment when Elena would embarrass herself in front of 500 important guests. Victoria was so confident that Elena would fail spectacularly that she had already started planning what she would say when she fired her. But down in the lobby, night after night, something beautiful was happening. Elena Rodriguez was remembering who she really was, and the grand piano was singing again after years of silence. The invisible janitor was preparing to show the world that talent and dignity don't depend on your job title or the clothes you wear. The night before the gala, Elena sat at the piano and played through both pieces one final time. Her performance was flawless, filled with passion and skill that hadn't been heard in that building for decades. Robert, who had become her biggest supporter, stood nearby with tears in his eyes. "Elena," he said quietly, "tomorrow night you're going to show them all what real class looks like." The ballroom at the Grand Metropolitan Hotel was transformed into a scene of pure elegance. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables decorated with white roses and gold accents. 500 of the city's most influential people filled the room. Wealthy business owners, politicians, celebrities, and philanthropists who could afford the $1,000 tickets to this exclusive charity event. Victoria arrived fashionably late, making a grand entrance in a stunning black evening gown that had cost more than most people made in 3 months. Her jewelry sparkled under the lights and her hair was styled to perfection. She moved through the crowd like a queen, accepting compliments and basking in the attention that came with hosting such a prestigious event. The evening had been going perfectly. The dinner was exquisite, the wine was flowing freely, and Victoria had given a speech that received enthusiastic applause. She had talked about the importance of supporting children's education and how Meridian Corporation was proud to give back to the community. Several major donors had already pledged significant amounts of money. Now it was time for the entertainment portion of the evening. The beautiful grand piano had been carefully moved from the Meridian lobby to the front of the ballroom, positioned so that everyone would have a perfect view of the performance. Victoria stood up to address the crowd, her voice carrying easily through the ballroom's excellent sound system. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a very special treat for you this evening. As you know, music has the power to touch our hearts and inspire our souls. Tonight, we have arranged for a truly unique performance. The crowd murmured with anticipation. Many of them were expecting Roberto Chen, the famous pianist that Victoria had mentioned in earlier conversations with some of the guests. Tonight's performer is someone very special to our Meridian Corporation family, Victoria continued, her voice taking on a tone that sounded almost mocking to those who knew her well. She represents the kind of authentic talent that we believe in supporting. Victoria paused, clearly enjoying the moment. Please join me in welcoming Elena Rodriguez, who will be performing for us this evening. A confused silence fell over the ballroom. This was not the name they had been expecting to hear. As Elena walked from the side entrance toward the piano, the crowd's confusion grew. She was wearing a simple black dress, the only formal outfit she owned, and her graying hair was pulled back in an elegant bun. But to these wealthy guests, she looked completely out of place. Elena could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes watching her as she made her way to the piano. She heard whispered conversations and saw puzzled expressions on the faces in the crowd. Some people were pulling out their phones, probably wondering who this unknown woman was supposed to be. Victoria watched from her table with barely concealed amusement. She was already imagining how she would handle the situation when Elena inevitably embarrassed herself. She had even prepared a short speech about how the company believed in giving everyone a chance, which would make her look generous and forgiving when she had to ask Elena to stop playing. At the back of the ballroom, standing near the service entrance, Robert was watching nervously. He had managed to get permission to work security for the event, partly because he wanted to support Elena. Several other employees from Meridian were also there in various service roles, all of them silently rooting for Elena. Elena reached the piano bench and sat down carefully. She adjusted the seat height and positioned her hands over the keys. For a moment, she closed her eyes and took a deep breath. In that quiet moment, she thought about her parents, her brother, and Diego. She thought about the little girl from Buenos Aires who had first discovered the magic of music. She thought about all the years of dreams deferred and talent hidden. When Elena opened her eyes, something had changed. The nervous janitor was gone, replaced by the confident performer she had once been. She looked out at the crowd with dignity and grace, then placed her fingers on the keys. The first notes of Chopin's Ballet No. 1 in G minor filled the ballroom, and the effect was immediate and electric. This was not the hesitant playing of an amateur. This was the work of a master musician. Elena's fingers moved across the keys with precision and passion that took everyone's breath away. The piece began softly, almost tenderly, but as Elena continued to play, the music grew in complexity and emotion. Her interpretation was both technically perfect and deeply moving. She wasn't just playing the notes. She was telling a story with the music, sharing her heart with everyone in the room. The confused murmurs from the crowd quickly died away, replaced by complete focused attention. People who had been checking their phones or chatting quietly with their neighbors were now completely absorbed in the performance. Some of the guests were leaning forward in their chairs, not wanting to miss a single note. Victoria's smug expression was slowly changing to one of shock and disbelief. This was not what she had expected at all. The janitor she had mocked and humiliated was playing like a world-class musician. Victoria felt her confidence draining away as she realized that Elena was not going to embarrass herself. She was going to embarrass Victoria instead. As Elena moved through the different sections of the Chopin piece, her playing became even more powerful and emotional. The ballade tells a story through music, And Elena was bringing that story to life in a way that reached into the hearts of everyone listening. Some people in the audience had tears in their eyes, moved by the beauty of what they were hearing. The ballroom was completely silent except for the sound of Elena's playing. Even the waiters had stopped their service to listen. This was not just a performance, it was a revelation. Everyone in the room was witnessing something extraordinary, something they would remember for the rest of their lives. When Elena finished the Chopin piece, the silence continued for several seconds. Then slowly applause began to build. It started with just a few people, but quickly grew until the entire ballroom was giving Elena a standing ovation. The applause was thunderous, filled with genuine appreciation and amazement. But Elena wasn't finished. As the applause died down, she positioned her hands for her second piece, a section from Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. This piece was even more challenging and emotional than the Chopin, requiring not just technical skill but the ability to convey deep passion and drama through music. From the very first notes, it was clear that Elena was operating on a completely different level than anyone had imagined possible. The Rachmaninoff piece is known for its sweeping melodies and complex harmonies, and Elena played it with such skill and emotion that it seemed like the piano was singing. Victoria sat frozen at her table, watching her carefully planned evening transform into Elena's triumph. She had wanted to humiliate the janitor, but instead she was being shown up by someone whose talent far exceeded anything Victoria could have imagined. The wealthy guests who were supposed to be impressed by Victoria's sophisticated event were now completely focused on the extraordinary woman at the piano. As Elena played the final notes of the Rachmaninoff, the emotion in the room was overwhelming. This wasn't just a piano performance, it was a masterpiece, a moment of pure artistic beauty that transported everyone present to a higher level of human experience. When the last note faded away, the silence was profound. Then the applause erupted again, even louder and more enthusiastic than before. People were shouting, "Bravo!" and "Magnificent." The standing ovation seemed to go on forever, with the crowd showing their appreciation for what they had just witnessed. Elena stood up from the piano bench and gave a graceful bow. Her eyes were shining with emotion, but her dignity remained intact. She had just proven that talent and class have nothing to do with job titles or social status. She had shown 500 influential people what real excellence looked like. Victoria remained seated, her face pale and her hands shaking slightly. The woman she had tried to humiliate had just delivered one of the most beautiful performances anyone in that room had ever heard. And now, according to their agreement, Victoria owed Elena anything she wanted. The standing ovation continued for what felt like an eternity. People in the ballroom were not just clapping politely. They were cheering, shouting praise, and some were even crying from the emotional impact of Elena's performance. This was the kind of response usually reserved for the world's greatest concert halls, not a corporate charity event. Elena remained standing beside the piano, accepting the thunderous applause with grace and humility. Her simple black dress suddenly looked elegant rather than plain, and her dignified bearing commanded the respect of everyone in the room. She had transformed from an invisible janitor into a commanding artist in the space of 2 musical pieces. At table 12, near the front of the ballroom sat Jonathan Morrison, the music critic from the city's most prestigious newspaper. He had attended thousands of concerts in his 30-year career and had heard many of the world's greatest pianists perform. As he watched Elena acknowledge the applause, he was already composing his review in his mind. This was extraordinary, not just the technical skill, but the emotional depth and artistic maturity of her interpretation. "Incredible," whispered the woman sitting next to him, who happened to be the director of the city's symphony orchestra. "I haven't heard Rachmaninoff played with that kind of passion in years. Who is she? Where did she come from?" Similar conversations were happening throughout the ballroom. The mayor, who had been checking his phone during dinner, was now completely focused on Elena. Several wealthy art patrons were already wondering if Elena would be interested in performing at their private events. The president of the city's music conservatory was making notes about possibly offering Elena a teaching position. But the most dramatic reaction was happening at Victoria's table. The CEO sat frozen in her chair, her face a mask of shock and disbelief. Everything she thought she knew about Elena, about talent, about social hierarchy, had just been turned upside down. The woman she had mocked as just a janitor had just delivered a performance that would be talked about for years. Victoria's dinner companions at the table were equally stunned, but for different reasons. They had heard Victoria make disparaging comments about the evening's special entertainment and had been expecting some kind of amateur performance that would reflect Victoria's supposed generosity in giving an employee a chance. Instead, they had witnessed artistic excellence of the highest level. "Victoria," said Richard Blackwood, one of the city's most successful businessmen, "that was absolutely magnificent. How did you discover such incredible talent? That woman could perform at Carnegie Hall." Victoria struggled to find words. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She had been so confident that Elena would embarrass herself that she hadn't prepared for this possibility. The agreement she had made so carelessly, promising Elena anything she wanted if she didn't humiliate herself, suddenly felt like a trap of her own making. As the applause finally began to die down, Elena moved to the microphone that had been set up beside the piano. Her voice was soft but clear, carrying easily through the excellent sound system. "Thank you," she said simply, her slight accent adding warmth to her words. "Music has been absent from my life for many years, and tonight I am grateful to have been able to share it with all of you again." The crowd appreciated her humble words, and another round of applause began. Elena raised her hand gently to quiet them, indicating she had more to say. "I would like to thank Meridian Corporation for this opportunity," Elena continued, her eyes finding Victoria's table. "And I especially want to thank Ms. Victoria Harrington, who made this performance possible through her generous challenge." There was something in Elena's tone that made several people in the audience look more closely at Victoria. The word challenge seemed to suggest there was more to this story than anyone knew. Elena left the microphone and walked gracefully toward Victoria's table. The crowd watched with interest, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Victoria's face had gone completely pale, and she looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. When Elena reached the table, she spoke quietly, but clearly enough for the nearby guests to hear. "Ms. Harrington, I believe we had an agreement. You said that if I didn't embarrass myself tonight, you would give me anything I wanted." Victoria's dinner companions looked between the two women with growing curiosity. It was becoming clear that there was much more to this story than they had realized. Yes," Victoria managed to whisper, her voice barely audible. Elena smiled, but it wasn't a cruel smile like Victoria's had been. It was the smile of someone who had found inner strength she hadn't known she possessed. "I'll come to your office tomorrow morning to discuss what I want. I think you'll find my request quite reasonable." With that, Elena turned and walked away, leaving Victoria sitting in stunned silence. The other guests at the table began asking questions that Victoria couldn't or wouldn't answer. She mumbled something about needing fresh air and hurried out of the ballroom, her elegant evening completely destroyed. As Victoria fled, Elena was surrounded by admirers. The music critic introduced himself and asked for an interview. The symphony director wanted to discuss possible collaborations. Wealthy patrons were offering to sponsor future performances. Elena accepted their business cards graciously, but didn't commit to anything immediately. Robert, who had been watching from the back of the room, made his way through the crowd to congratulate Elena. When he reached her, she gave him a warm hug. "Thank you for believing in me," she whispered to him. "Thank you for protecting my practice time and supporting my dream." "Elena," Robert replied, his voice emotional, "you just showed 500 people what real talent and dignity look like. I'm proud to know you." As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, many of them stopped to compliment Elena one more time. The charity event had raised more money than any previous year, partly because people were so inspired by Elena's performance that they made additional donations on the spot. Elena finally left the hotel just after midnight, carrying a small bouquet of flowers that someone had given her, and a purse full of business cards from people who wanted to work with her. As she walked to her car, a modest older sedan that looked out of place among the luxury vehicles in the hotel parking lot, she reflected on how much had changed in just a few hours. For 15 years, she had been invisible, forgotten, dismissed as unimportant. Tonight she had reminded herself and everyone else that talent and worth are not determined by job titles or social status. She had also proven that sometimes the greatest opportunities come disguised as challenges from people who underestimate you. Tomorrow, she would go to Victoria's office to claim her prize. But tonight, she would go home to her small apartment and sleep peacefully for the first time in many years, knowing that she had reclaimed the part of herself that had been lost for so long. The grand piano was moved back to the Meridian lobby the next day, but it would never be the same. It had been awakened from its long silence and had sung again, and everyone who worked in that building would forever remember the night when the invisible janitor became the star of the show and proved that real class has nothing to do with money or status. Victoria spent a sleepless night in her penthouse apartment, staring out at the city lights and trying to figure out how everything had gone so wrong. The elegant charity gala that was supposed to be her triumph had become her humiliation. She kept replaying Elena's performance in her mind, unable to understand how a simple janitor could possess such extraordinary talent. By morning, Victoria had convinced herself that she could somehow minimize the damage. Maybe Elena would ask for a small raise or a better work schedule. Perhaps she would want a recommendation letter for another job. Victoria prepared several reasonable offers that she hoped would satisfy Elena and end this embarrassing situation quickly. At exactly 9 o'clock, there was a knock on Victoria's office door. "Come in," she called, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Elena entered the office, but she wasn't alone. She was accompanied by a distinguished older man in an expensive suit who carried a leather briefcase. Elena was dressed differently too. Instead of her cleaning uniform, she wore a simple but elegant business outfit that made her look professional and dignified. "Good morning, Ms. Harrington," Elena said politely. "I'd like you to meet Mr. Davidson, my attorney." Victoria's confidence crumbled immediately. Why would a janitor need a lawyer? This was not going the way she had expected at all. Mr. Davidson stepped forward and placed his briefcase on Victoria's desk. "Ms. Harrington, my client and I are here to discuss the agreement you made with Mrs. Rodriguez 2 weeks ago. I believe you promised to give her anything she wanted if her performance last night was satisfactory." Victoria nodded nervously. "Yes, but I'm sure we can work out something reasonable." "Oh, I think you'll find Mrs. Rodriguez's request very reasonable indeed," Mr. Davidson said as he opened his briefcase and removed a thick folder of documents. "But first, I think there are some things you should know about my client." Elena took a seat across from Victoria's desk, her posture straight and confident. "Ms. Harrington, 15 years ago when I first applied for the janitor position at this company, I didn't tell the complete truth about my background. I was afraid that if people knew who I really was, it might cause complications." Victoria frowned, not understanding what Elena was talking about. Mr. Davidson spread several documents across the desk. "Mrs. Rodriguez is not just any employee, Ms. Harrington. Her full legal name is Elena Mendoza Rodriguez de Meridian. She is the widow of Jonathan Meridian III, grandson of this company's founder." Victoria's face went completely white. "That's impossible," she whispered. "I assure you it's quite true," Mr. Davidson continued. "When Mrs. Rodriguez married Jonathan Meridian 20 years ago in Argentina, she legally became part of the Meridian family. Jonathan died tragically in a car accident shortly after their marriage, but not before he had updated his will to leave his inheritance to his wife." Elena spoke quietly, her voice filled with old sadness. "My husband Jonathan was a wonderful man who believed in supporting the arts and helping people achieve their dreams. He had come to Argentina to invest in cultural programs when we met. Our marriage was brief but very happy." Mr. Davidson pointed to one of the documents. "According to Jonathan Meridian's will and the original company charter, Mrs. Rodriguez inherited a 51% controlling interest in Meridian Corporation. However, she chose not to claim this inheritance at the time, due to her grief and desire for privacy." Victoria stared at the legal documents in shock. But that would make her the majority owner of this company," Elena finished. "Yes, that's correct. For 15 years, I've been cleaning the offices of the company I actually own." The room was completely silent, except for the sound of Victoria's rapid breathing. Her world was collapsing around her and she couldn't process what she was hearing. "Why?" Victoria finally managed to ask. "Why didn't you claim ownership before now? Why did you let me? Why did you work as a janitor?" Elena's expression was calm and dignified. "After my husband died, I was overwhelmed with grief. I moved to America to start over and I wanted a simple, quiet life. The lawyer who handled Jonathan's estate tried to contact me several times over the years, but I always told him I wasn't ready to deal with the inheritance. However, Mr. Davidson added, after the incident 2 weeks ago when you humiliated Mrs. Rodriguez for touching the piano, she finally decided it was time to claim what was rightfully hers. Elena leaned forward slightly. You see, Ms. Harrington, that piano has special meaning to me. It was a gift from Jonathan to the company, specifically chosen because he knew I was a professional pianist. He had it placed in the lobby so that someday when I was ready I could play it again. Victoria felt sick to her stomach. Every cruel word she had said, every moment of humiliation she had inflicted on Elena, had been directed at the actual owner of the company. So, Elena continued, when you challenged me to perform at the gala, you gave me the perfect opportunity to reclaim both my musical identity and my rightful place in this company. Mr. Davidson reached into his briefcase and pulled out another document. This is Mrs. Rodriguez's formal claim to her inheritance, properly filed and legally binding. As of this morning, she is the controlling shareholder and rightful owner of Meridian Corporation. Elena stood up and walked around the desk to where Victoria was sitting. Her voice was gentle but firm. Ms. Harrington, I'm prepared to offer you a choice. You can resign from your position with dignity, and I'll provide you with an excellent reference letter and a generous severance package. Or you can fight this legally and be removed from your position in a much more public and embarrassing way. Victoria's hands were shaking as she looked at the legal documents. Everything was properly notarized and official. There was no way to fight this, no way to argue with the clear evidence of Elena's ownership rights. I don't understand, Victoria stammered. If you owned the company all along, why did you let me treat you so badly? Why did you work as a janitor? Elena's expression softened with something that might have been pity. Because I wanted to understand what kind of person you really were. I wanted to see how you treated people you considered beneath you. And unfortunately, you showed me exactly who you are. She returned to her chair and sat down gracefully. You see, Victoria, real leadership isn't about having an expensive education or wearing designer clothes. It's about treating all people with dignity and respect regardless of their position. It's about recognizing that every person has value and potential. Elena paused, then continued with quiet strength. My husband Jonathan built this company on the principle that everyone deserves to be treated fairly. He would be very disappointed to see how you've been running things. Mr. Davidson placed a resignation letter in front of Victoria. We've prepared this for your signature. It's a dignified exit that protects your professional reputation. We recommend you sign it. Victoria stared at the paper for a long moment. Her career, her power, her entire identity was crumbling around her. But as she looked at Elena's calm, dignified face, she realized she had been beaten by someone far superior to herself in every way that mattered. With trembling hands, Victoria signed the resignation letter. Elena stood up again and extended her hand to Victoria. I hope this experience teaches you something valuable about treating people with respect. Everyone has a story, and everyone deserves basic human dignity. Victoria shook Elena's hand weakly, then gathered her personal belongings and left the office that had once been hers. As the door closed behind Victoria, Elena sat down in the CEO chair for the first time. She looked around the office with its expensive furniture and panoramic city view, then picked up the phone to call an all-staff meeting. An hour later, Elena stood in front of the same conference room where Victoria had announced the charity gala. But this time, the atmosphere was completely different. The employees, especially the custodial and maintenance staff, looked at Elena with amazement and respect. I know this is a surprise to everyone, Elena began, her voice warm and inclusive. I want you to know that while my title has changed, my commitment to treating every person in this company with dignity and respect has not. She looked around the room, making eye contact with people from every level of the organization. We're going to make some changes here. We're going to create a workplace where everyone's contributions are valued, where talent is recognized regardless of job title, and where every person is treated with the respect they deserve. The applause that followed was genuine and enthusiastic, completely different from the polite, fearful clapping that had greeted Victoria's announcements. Later that afternoon, Elena returned to the lobby and sat down at the grand piano. As she began to play a gentle, hopeful melody, employees gathered around to listen. The music filled the space with warmth and beauty, symbolizing the new beginning that Elena was creating for everyone at Meridian. Corporation, the piano that had once been an untouchable symbol of elite privilege, had become something much more valuable, a symbol of hope, dignity, and the power of treating all people with respect. And Elena Rodriguez, the former invisible janitor who had reclaimed her identity as both an artist and a leader, played on as her employees listened and smiled, finally feeling valued and appreciated in their own workplace.